Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 60. This is the final episode in my series on the Kingdom Plantae. So far in the series, I've talked about all of the major lineages of the plants. So today, I'm going to tie all of this in to the human story. I'm going to explore the many ways in which humans interact with plants. This episode will be a merger, if you will, of the ecological function and the utility of plants, and the practical uses that we humans find for them. For example, trees have several ecological functions. They can provide shelter and shade. They stabilize the soil with their roots, and many trees grow seed pods or cones or fruits that can provide ecological services to other animals. From the human angle, we use the wood of a tree for building stuff, for lumber, for furniture. And we eat the fruit of the tree as part of our diet. Now, these are obviously very simple, general examples, but it demonstrates the basic stuff that I'll be talking about today. Except I'm going to be applying this principle to all kinds of plants. I'll look at not just the edible plants, like those from the earliest hominid diet to the GMO crops used in modern industrial agriculture, but I'll also look at plants in textiles, plants that are used as tools or as decoration. I'll look at the plants that contain medicinal and therapeutic substances and have found a place in the various ethnobotanical medical kits kept by indigenous people throughout the history of the world. And of course, I'll also talk about the plants that we use to generate modern medicines. And finally, I'll also talk about plant-derived drugs that people consume for medicinal, spiritual, or recreational purposes. As I'm sure you're well aware, plants have played a foundational role in all of our lives, in all of human civilization. Our very lives depend on the plants in a million different ways. It's an understatement to say that plants are important. It is more accurate to say that plants are extremely fundamental to the entirety of human civilization. The most fundamental and basic role that plants have in the lives of humans is being food. For millions of years, stretching backwards through geologic and evolutionary lengths of time, the ancestors of the human species, our cousin species, and the animal species that we preyed upon for meat, all of them depended on the plants for food. Even carnivorous predators depend on plants in a secondary kind of way, for without them, the herbivores would starve to death, and without the teeming herds of herbivores to prey upon, the predators would find themselves short of food and facing starvation of their own. There's a reason plants are referred to ecologically as primary producers. By harnessing the light energy of the sun to power the metabolism of carbon dioxide fixation, plants can create biomass with nothing but water, air, and sunlight. This biomass then gets eaten by insects, or grazing ungulates, or tree-dwelling primates, or rodents, and it gets digested, and some of the chemicals and some of the chemical energy that was once in the plant's body now gets incorporated into the herbivore's body. Then carnivores come along and eat these insects, or the grazing ungulates, or the tree-dwelling primates, or the rodents, and they again incorporate some of that chemical energy and some of those nutrients into their own bodies. This is the food web. This is a dietary ecology. And humans fit quite nicely into this food web. It's the exact same case for us. When you eat anything, be it a plant or an animal, your body will try to digest it. The food will get broken down on a chemical level, and the derived nutrients will flow through your blood to all of your tissues, where the cells absorb those nutrients and keep themselves alive, which, in turn, keeps you alive. You, as this giant meta-collection of individual cells, all thrumming with cooperative activity to keep the superstructure going and perpetuating itself. The plants are integral to the human diet because they provide us with a wide variety of nutrients and vitamins, as well as fiber, although fiber isn't actually digested. Instead, it acts as a kind of digestive aid or a sponge to help lubricate the intestines. In the early days of the Homo sapien, the plants that we ate were wild growing, like the fruits that one can find naturally hanging off of a tree, or some kind of bush plant covered in berries. Other natural vegetable foods include legumes like beans, lentils, and peas, roots, tree nuts, seeds, and leafy greens like cruciferous vegetables. I like cruciferous plants almost as much as I like the word cruciferous. It's just fun to say. But this group includes plants like cabbage, rutabaga, cauliflower, broccoli, and Brussels sprouts. These cruciferous plants are widely associated with good health outcomes. Where a group of people have a diet that's high in cruciferous vegetables, they tend to have better quality of health than those people whose diet doesn't have as much or any cruciferous vegetables. The cruciferous vegetables contain a chemical called glucoraphanin, which is metabolized by gut bacteria to sulforaphane, which then stimulates the production of what are called phase 2 enzymes, like glutathione S-transferases and quinone reductases. These are all enzymes that are all associated with the suppression of carcinogens. Basically, they offer a little bit of biochemical help to your cells to help reduce your risk of developing cancer from carcinogenic compounds like aflatoxin and phenanthrene. When agriculture was developed more than 5,000 years ago, humans began to eat a lot of grain foods. These cereal grain crops were some of the first plants that humans domesticated. They were some of the first crops that we planted and harvested, and we used them to produce everything from breads to dumplings. Many grains, like wheat, rye, barley, and oat, are harvested and then ground into a dust called flour. The flour is mixed with water, or milk, or eggs, or some other ingredient to create breads. Bread can be eaten by itself, or used as the basis for a number of other ingredients, like how toast gets covered in jams and marmalades, or how warm baked bread gets sprinkled with spices and seasonings, or how bread is stacked with meat and cheese and lettuce to make a sandwich. Grains are also used to create pastas, which are hugely important staple foods in many parts of the world. Italy is perhaps the most well-known pasta capital of the world. Think of almost any type of pasta, and it has an Italian name. Spaghetti, rotini, macaroni, linguine, vermicelli, fettuccine, you get the idea. Rice is another kind of grain, and it's a hugely common food in much of the world, particularly in East Asia. Long ago, Asian farmers discovered the utility of tiered farms. The local geography, because of the Himalayas and a lot of the associated sister mountain chains, the local geography is often rugged and irregular, covered in steep, sloping hills and ravines. To farm this land, the inhabitants carved the soil into stepped terraces, with each terrace, each level, able to hold a certain amount of water. The rice is grown on these terraces, with the rice plants entirely submerged in the water. Now, the rice doesn't necessarily need to be submerged. It just so happens that the rice can grow happily. It can grow just fine in the water. But a lot of the weeds and the pests that parasitize rice can't. They need air, and so submerged rice is out of bounds for them. This makes it a really effective way for growing rice, and for getting big crop yields. Big crop yields are important when rice is a staple food for literally billions of people. Rice is eaten by itself, or it's mixed into a larger, more complex dish, where it's typically used as a carbohydrate base. As a quick aside, the reason that grains like this were some of the first plants to be domesticated and the first harvest that we developed as a human civilization is not necessarily because carbohydrates are so good for us, it's because they could provide raw calories. And when you eat grains, it gives you a filling sensation. So for the growing human populations that could support themselves on these crop yields, grains were really the way to go because it was the most environmentally and economically viable. And the end result, breads and dumplings and rice and everything else, it provides a raw carbohydrate base for other foods that have more minerals and nutrients, like meats and vegetables. Alright, so getting back to the ways that billions of people eat rice, there's a particularly famous Chinese dish called lo han jai, or Buddha's Delight, which is a vegetarian medley of rice, bamboo shoots, seasoned with stuff like soy sauce, garlic, ginger, peanut oil, or a Chinese cooking wine called huangjui, and it's mixed with a number of other plant-based ingredients. The recipe for Buddha's Delight typically includes sliced carrots, snow peas, black mushrooms, noodles, napa cabbage, and something crunchy like peanuts, ginkgo nuts, lotus seeds, or water chestnuts. Other sometimes used ingredients include bean sprouts, bok choy, celery, red jujubes, potatoes, corn, and certain edible funguses like straw mushrooms or oyster mushrooms. Even though it's primarily a vegetarian dish, sometimes animal products are added, like shrimp or oyster or eggs. In India, where the Hindu religion is most widely practiced, vegetarian diets are the norm. Religious beliefs and traditions, like the veneration of the sacred cow and the Jainist principle of complete non-violence, have helped to forge a massive society that feeds almost entirely, not completely, but almost entirely, off of plants instead of meat. Many of these foods have exotic names and equally exotic tastes, like pakoda, which is a large vegetable like an onion or a chili pepper deep fried in a batter called ghee. A pakoda dish mixed with onion is called pyaz pakoda. When it's made with potatoes, it's called aloo pakoda. With spinach, it's palak pakoda. There's foods like chana masala, which is a dish made of cooked black chana chickpeas, tomatoes, onions, and chili peppers, seasoned with garlic, ginger, and a mixture of Indian spices called garam masala. Vegetables are used for an almost uncountable number of dishes and meals all across the world. In Japan, seaweed is used to wrap up rice into sushi and to make miso soup. A dish popular from the Middle East to Eastern Europe is moussaka, which is a potato or eggplant covered in sauce or custard and typically eaten warm. The Greeks like their spanakopita, which is a thin pastry of fio covered in olive oil and filled with spinach, feta cheese, egg, and onion. In Ethiopia, they enjoy injera, which is a flatbread made out of baked teff flour. Russians have a number of famous vegetable dishes, like the sour-tasting beetroot soup called borscht, a cold soup mixed with cucumbers, radishes, and onions called okroshka, and pierogi dumplings filled with stuff like potatoes and or sauerkraut, among other ingredients. Now, I could go on forever about all of the vegetable foods that we eat because the list is extensive. But for your sake and mine, I'll stop with the food here. The point is that humans fundamentally depend on plants for food, and that we don't just eat a huge variety of vegetables, we cook these vegetables in a huge variety of different ways to make almost limitless combinations of different meals. Besides food, however, plants still have tremendous utility. For example, we use plant fibers to make textiles, and we use woody plant tissues to make lumber for building materials, or for furniture, or for any other wooden device. Some of the earliest textiles that the human species created were simple twisting or braided strands of yarn, or rope. Species of grasses and rushes often have long, thin leaves that can be easily tied or wrapped or interlaced together to create a kind of textile fabric. The grass-based plant fibers are typically used in the production of rope. Clothing is typically made with a more flexible, softer kind of textile, like the linen that we create from the flax plant. Cotton plants can have their cotton harvested, decorticated, and spun into cotton yarn, which then gets turned into textiles like shirts and socks. Because of the quality of cotton fabrics, it's become one of the most popular materials for making cheap, reasonably durable clothing. Textiles can also be made from a particularly impressive plant called hemp, which is a variety of cannabis sativa that grows extremely fast and produces high-quality plant fibers that can be used to create equally high-quality products. First, the hemp plant is laid on the ground, where it then gets run over by crushing rollers that pulverize the unnecessary plant material, and brush rollers that will come in and sweep away the wet waste, leaving just the strong hemp fibers, this connective tissue, behind. These fibers could then be pulverized to make paper, or braided together to make thick rope and tiny string. From the 16th to the 19th centuries, sailboats would use thick, sturdy ropes made from hemp covered in a protective tar. The hemp fibers can also be made into thin fabrics with the same soft texture of linen, or into thick, coarse fabrics like the kind used in a giant farming sack. Hemp has utility that reaches out beyond simple textiles. It has immediate ecological utility in that it's used to fight off weeds. Hemp can grow very tall and very dense, which means that a stand of hemp plants will crowd up and block out the light from reaching the ground. This is often effective enough to starve out shorter species of weeds that might be interfering with an agricultural crop or something like that. Additionally, hemp roots are able to filter water in the soil and remove dangerous compounds, making the water cleaner and healthier for any other plants living downstream. Hemp is also a major fiber used in the production of composite materials and plastics, which are used in car doors and sinks, among many, many other things. Hemp can also be used as a biofuel. The oils produced by the hemp plant can literally be extracted and used to directly fuel a diesel engine, although the commercial scale of hemp being used for biofuel is relatively small. Hemp can even be used as a building material when it's pounded into flat sheets of hemp fiberboard, or it can even be shaped into blocks and stacked like bricks as thermal insulation. Hemp fibers can even be integrated into concrete mixes to provide a degree of elastic strength within the concrete block. Where hemp fibers can be mixed with other ingredients to create composite building materials, other plants and plant tissues can be used to directly create building materials. I'm talking about cutting down trees and harvesting wood. Lignin is the chemical in the plant's cell walls that gives it the strength and structural integrity that we associate with wood. It's the difference between woody tissue and softer herbaceous tissue that doesn't have any lignin in it. This lignin is a long polymer that gets arranged in sheets with uncountable trillions of other lignin molecules, and their collective interweaving and interconnecting on the cellular level gives the wood its hardness and its strength. We've taken advantage of these qualities and used wood for all manner of many things for many tens of thousands of years. Our first sophisticated hunting tools were the spear and the bow and arrow, both of them items built from wood. The first weapons that humans used to kill each other through war were built with wood, often with sharp stone tips. When we captured fire and used it to cook meat and keep ourselves warm through the cold Paleolithic nights, we used wood and sometimes brush and scrub and other softer, smaller, dead, drying herbaceous plants as fuel for the fire. In very early times, we also began to use wood to build our homes and any furniture we might need. In much of Europe, oak was predominantly used for housing construction, thanks to its raw strength and durability. Heavy oak doors made formidable gates for your castle, that invading attackers found particularly difficult to break down or to break through. Humans are so ingenious that we've even learned how to take low-quality wood that couldn't be used on its own for building anything and break it down into wood chips that get amalgamated with glue into a composite wood material like fiberboard or particle board. These engineered wood panels are used for siding, for flooring, and for most things that regular wood is used for but would otherwise be too expensive. The earliest boats and ships that we used to navigate the oceans were all made of wood. Elm trees were particularly useful for this purpose, as elm wood could resist weakening from rot if it was kept hydrated, which would be the case for the wood used on an ocean-going ship. That wood is going to be almost always hydrated. When we used our plant-based textile technology to create sails, and created sail-powered ships, these ships had to hold their sails on masts, and the mast itself had to be a tall, strong piece of wood that stands straight up. British sailors during the Age of Empire were known to plant various species of tree, like softwood pine trees, at the places that they visited and conquered, so that the seeds would eventually grow into the trees that would be harvested to make the mast for more ships in the British Navy. It was a long-term kind of plan, as a lot of these trees took decades, if not a century, to mature. Another really important utility that humans get out of plants is the extraction of medicines and healing compounds that are produced within the plant's tissues. Sometimes the plant has a chemical that it uses as a defense against mammal predators, or to discourage insects from eating it, or whatever else. And over time, we've discovered that applying the chemical to a wound can help along the healing process, or consuming that plant with its associated chemical can treat a disease, or provide some other kind of medicinal function. The first attempts at using plants for this kind of purpose involved gathering up nettles and dandelion and grinding them up, with their oils used as topical agents to treat wounds, or as ingredients in healing mixtures. For example, early folk medicine used the nettle's sting to induce inflammation, which was used to treat joint pain. The leaves were boiled to make a tea, which was believed to be effective at treating problems with the kidneys, the intestines, the heart and veins, and the skin. Dandelions are also boiled into tea, or ground down so that oil can be collected, and this is used to treat intestinal, liver, and urinary problems. There's an ancient Egyptian document, more than 3,500 years old, called the Ebers Papyrus, which catalogs natural plant medicines. These healing herbs listed on the Ebers Papyrus that were used by the ancient Egyptians included aloe, juniper, and castor beans. We still use chemicals from the aloe plant today, usually as a kind of moisturizer or lotion. Juniper has been used for a variety of things, like treating diabetes, or making tea that's good for your teeth, or as a form of birth control. Castor beans can be pulverized to give castor oil, which has anti-inflammatory properties and might be protective for the liver. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of other plants that have biochemicals with medicinal value. For example, a flowering plant called St. John's wort is a well-known COX-1 inhibitor and an arachidonate 5-lipoxygenase inhibitor, which for some people makes it a useful treatment, or more appropriately, a supplementary treatment for light to moderate depression. There's a genus of neophyte plants called ephedra, which produces alkaloid chemicals called ephedrins. These chemicals, these ephedrins, have a few interesting uses, like making breathing easier by dilating the bronchial tubes, or increasing metabolism through some kind of thermogenic mechanism. Although it hasn't been proven to be a performance-enhancing drug, ephedra is used as such, presumably because it increases heart rate and constricts blood vessels, so it feels like it's doing something. Hardcore athletes can get a little carried away when it comes to finding an edge over their competition. Some ephedra compounds were actually banned in the US because they caused serious, potentially fatal problems, with symptoms including headaches, insomnia and dizziness, itchiness, hypothermia, and dehydration. And in really bad cases, it would cause irregular heartbeats, seizures, stroke, and heart attack. It's a rather morbid fact that throughout the great bulk of human history, our best way to discover a plant-based medicine and to learn what it did was to simply eat the plant, or apply its oils to our wounds. If it did nothing, then that was that. If it helps, then awesome, great, you just discovered a new medicinal plant that will help your clan. But sometimes it would lead to greater problems, like illness and death. And through the hard, long process of trial and error, with human lives on the line, we learned which plants offered safe and effective compounds, which plants didn't, and which plants were more dangerous than they were helpful. When the pace of technological advancement really started to pick up in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, our capacity for manipulating and extracting chemicals from plants was massively increased. In the early 19th century, morphine was isolated from the opium poppy and used as a painkiller. Then, sometime after that, the syrup of ipecac was isolated from the ipecacuanha and used as a vomit-inducing agent to prevent poisoning. Then strychnine was isolated from the strychnine tree and used as a dangerous and painful poison to kill rodent and bird pests, and in larger doses and in other circumstances to kill other people. Many other chemicals were isolated during the early 19th century, like quinine, which was extracted from the cinchona tree and found use in treating malaria. And there's quinidine, which is a stereoisomer of quinine that's also extracted from the cinchona tree, except quinidine isn't used to treat malaria, it's used to treat ventricular arrhythmias, also known as an irregular heartbeat. Then there's salicylic acid, which is a plant hormone that's used to treat skin conditions like acne, warts, psoriasis, dermatitis, and dandruff. One of the plants with the most potential medicinal biochemicals is the opium poppy. The opium poppy plant grows a large seed pod, which is filled with a fluid substance called latex. This latex is absolutely packed with biochemicals that have all manner of uses in humans. You've probably heard of morphine and codeine, which are two phenanthrene alkaloids used primarily for pain management, either for chronic pain or for people coming out of surgeries or who've experienced physical trauma. There's another similar alkaloid called thebaine, which is used to produce a number of opiate drugs like hydrocodone and hydromorphone. Morphine is used to produce heroin, which is an opioid drug usually used for the treatment of pain, but it's primarily used recreationally, as it delivers a long-lasting, stupefying state of intoxication described as warm, relaxing ecstasy. Unfortunately, heroin is an extremely potent and addictive drug with major side effects, and recreational use, even medicinal use, can lead to heroin addiction. Heroin is one of the most dangerous drugs too, because it's involved in a majority of drug overdose cases. These opium-based drugs are involved in a huge epidemic in the US. Due to a corrupt kickback scheme with pharmaceutical companies, many doctors began overprescribing opioid painkillers to their patients to treat pain symptoms that, in many cases, didn't necessitate a medication as powerful as an opioid. Needless to say, people ended up getting hooked on these really powerful, really addictive pain pills. And for many people, when their prescription ran out, they were hooked and they needed more. To satisfy their opiate addiction, if they couldn't get their prescription refilled, people would just seek out heroin, and that necessarily involved the black market. Overdose deaths from heroin began to surge, especially as black market suppliers cut their heroin supply with the extremely potent drug fentanyl, which is so strong that a safe dose of fentanyl is measured in single grains. Taking 1 or 2 more grains of fentanyl over the safe limit, which are, keep in mind, the grains are literally the size of sand particles, and taking 1 or 2 more grains more than the limit can be enough to induce a fatal overdose. When this problem began to affect millions of people, leading to hundreds of thousands of overdose deaths, the opioid epidemic came into full swing. Fortunately, there's evidence that medicinal marijuana can help patients with chronic pain reduce their dependence on opioid painkillers. I already mentioned marijuana, or cannabis, earlier in this episode. Hemp is a type of cannabis, which I think really underscores how amazing this family of plants really is. Not only can it be used to make high-quality textiles and fabrics and ropes and even building materials, cannabis can also be used medicinally for pain relief, for appetite stimulation, and nausea suppression. And it can be used recreationally by people who enjoy the experience of cannabis intoxication. Plants are often used recreationally, and I don't just mean in the sense of doing drugs. I mean, that is part of it, but that's not all of it. The recreational activities we use plants for are really diverse. I mean, consider gardening and cultivating potted plants. My wife and I have a couple small little box gardens in the front of our house, and we use them to grow food, and it's really fun and it's really cool. Plant products can also be used to create cosmetics, and woods from a wide variety of trees can be used in carpentry. You have carpenters who use various types of wood to make furniture or decorative pieces, and usually this whole process is effort-intensive and often very artistic. For home gardens and decorative potted plants, small flowering plants are the most common because they don't take up much room. They're not expensive to maintain, and they look and smell good, brightening up a room and giving it a kind of natural aesthetic. There are some really interesting studies that show that being in a room with plants can actually make people more relaxed and less anxious. Cosmetics are also a big user of plant products, like the plant fragrances that are used in perfumes and colognes. Aloe and other moisturizers are used in shampoos and skin cleansers, and various flowers and plant pigments are used for their color in makeup, and stuff like linseed oil, eucalyptus oil, and oil of turpentine are used in mascara. A lot of plants have chemicals that when they're burned or the vapors inhaled, or when the chemicals are consumed, they'll provide some kind of intoxicating effect that the person finds enjoyable and fun, or soothing and relaxing, or stimulating in just the right kind of way. There's a wide range of drugs that fall into this category, with a huge range of effects and side effects, like coffee, cat, kratom, cocaine, and cannabis. There's a lot of variety in the types of drugs, the induced effect, and various side effects here. Coffee beans are used to make coffee, which is a stimulating, awakening beverage that makes people more alert and focused, and more productive if they're in a workplace environment. Cat is a flowering plant from Africa and the Middle East, where the leaves can be chewed to release an alkaloid called cathinone, which induces an amphetamine-like high, which suppresses appetite and causes the person to be excited and restless. Kratom is used for relaxation and stress relief. Cocaine is extracted from the coca plant and consumed to make the user feel stimulated and excited, confident, and motivated, although it has a very high potential for abuse, and frequent snorting of cocaine can degrade and destroy the membrane tissue in the nose between the nostrils, leading to nosebleeds and an unsightly hole through the center of your nose. The cannabis plant produces thick, sappy flowers that produce a psychoactive chemical called tetrahydrocannabinol, which can induce an intoxicating state characterized by slower reaction speeds, altered thought patterns, novel perceptions of routine things or normal ideas, an altered perception of time, an increased heart rate, and the munchies. Perhaps the most human use of plants is their involvement in religious myth and ceremony. All manner of plants are given religious connotation, from benign things that you might eat almost every day to obscure plants only eaten for the most sacred of rituals. Garlic is a common plant used in food, and for a time, for some folk medicine purpose, and it's also been incorporated into religious belief. In ancient Europe, garlic typically had positive connotations, as it was believed to be a ward against demons and vampires and other unholy creatures. In the schools of Hindu and Buddhist belief, garlic is perceived as an aphrodisiac, or a stimulant of desire. The Jainists find this quality spiritually distracting, as do the Buddhists, who consider them to be stimulants of aggression. In the Islamic hadiths, it is discouraged to eat garlic before coming to the mosque, because the subsequent bad breath and body odor are unpleasant for people who are sitting around you. Cannabis is also used for spiritual purposes, as practitioners use the altered mind state of cannabis intoxication as an aid to meditation and introspection. Olive branches are seen as symbols of peace and divine protection. In Christian mythology, the three magos, or wise men, the three mages who come bearing gifts for Christ, brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Now, gold isn't a plant, but frankincense and myrrh are. They're both a gum or a resin. Frankincense is extracted from the boswellia trees, and it's used as a kind of incense or perfume for spiritual ceremonies, or it can also be used as a skincare treatment. Myrrh is extracted from the thorny commiphora trees, and it can also be consumed to treat coughing, joint pain, colds, and indigestion, among several other common ailments. Also, real quick before I forget, I almost forgot, but the gum and the resin comment reminded me, a lot of trees produce a kind of thick, rubbery substance, like gum or resin, or in some cases, literal rubber. And these materials can be used as glues, or to make flexible yet sturdy materials. I mean, rubber is literally produced from the substances produced by rubber trees. Alright, so coming back to the uses that plants have in a more spiritual context, more exotic plants used in religious ceremonies include Salvia divinorum, peyote, and ayahuasca. Salvia divinorum is a powerful psychoactive plant that can cause hallucinations and entheogenic experiences. In South America, there are Mazatec shamans who use salvia in healing sessions to induce visions. Peyote is a flowering desert cactus called a divine messenger because when it's consumed, it induces a transcendent state of mind, deep insight, and entheogenic experiences. Ayahuasca is a psychedelic brew created by shamans in the Amazon rainforest, who take dimethyltryptamine-containing plants like Psychotria viridis or Diplopterus cabrerana and combine it with the Banisteriopsis caapi vine. This vine contains a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, or an MAOI, which makes the DMT active in the digestive system. It prevents the DMT from being broken down. These plants are boiled in water, and the subsequent brew is consumed. The ayahuasca intoxication creates one of the most powerful psychedelic and entheogenic experiences known to man, killing the ego and transforming the consciousness into a catalyst for introspective growth. All of these plant chemicals are entheogens, which are substances that generate the perception of experiencing God or the divine. For most people, these entheogenic experiences can help them find the personal strength and the motivation to overcome psychological problems, addictions, and other destructive behavior. Many people describe their experiences with these entheogens as the most spiritually significant moments in their entire lives. I think these compounds and these experiences are extremely important, far more important than most people might realize, because the measurable transformation in spiritual and emotional outlook can change people's lives for the better. That's why these plant substances have been used for thousands of years as medicines for the soul. This is also where concepts like Gaia, the Earth Mother, come from, as one of the common features of an ayahuasca trip, as described by the people who've taken it, is a profound sense of connection with the living world, and a perception of a maternal incarnation of the planet's life force. I think it's endlessly fascinating that these entheogens blur the line between esoteric religious mysticism and measurable biochemistry. On a more aesthetic note, they've helped humans understand our place in this world, and to illuminate the sacred relationship between humans and plants. This has been the series on the Kingdom Plantae. As always, thanks for listening.